For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dhlamini. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
Given the widespread and intense problem that South Africa currently faces, can we say that the country is in crisis?
You know, there's a lot of debates about what is a crisis. Is it an organic crisis or conjunctural crisis? But for purposes of this discussion, I would suggest we just take very simple understanding of the word crisis. It can mean a decisive moment, it can mean a moment of decision, but it can also mean, and this is what I'm referring to, is a widespread breakdown of systems, relationships, and similar things, which lead to a sense that the country is not functioning on an adequate basis. And I think we do get this sense. You have this sense that ministers are fighting with one another, the institutions of state are operating against one another. They are wanting to charge the Minister of Finance. Other ministers say, no, this should never be done in South Africa, and there's no case for him to meet. He had no reason to go there. There's a sense that there is a misuse of public power or an abuse of public power. When Thabo Mbeki was president of the country, he took decisions that were very unpopular. For example, he was main force behind the GEAR macroeconomic policy. Now, one may have disagreed with that. One may say it's a neoliberal policy or that it emphasizes deficit reduction and low inflation instead of basic things like unemployment. But it was within his powers. It was regular. It was done through proper processes in government, in the cabinet, and in the legislature. What you have in South Africa is irregular exercise of power by office bearers. Obviously, the most powerful example in the last year or so is the Nkandla situation, where both the President and the National Assembly were found to have acted contrary to their constitutional obligation. In other words, they acted illegally. They didn't just make a decision with which we may agree or disagree. We may, for example, there may have been a debate over a homestead for the President, and one side may have suggested this, the other may have said that, but within the scope of the resources of the country, the laws applicable, they may have, through a majority, made a decision to do something with which a lot of people disagreed, but it may have been lawful. But what happened here is that the funding was irregular. It was an excessive, compared with any previous president, the amount that was spent on his presidential homestead was excessive. And in order to meet these excessive costs, they diverted funds that were meant for poverty relief, amongst other things, in order to provide for the president's homestead. Now, we know also that the public protector made a report, and for a long time they denied that it had any legal force whatsoever. Some of the best minds in the ANC applied their mind to ridiculing the power of the public protector, and the president and members of cabinet and leaders of the ANC also did so. When it got to the Constitutional Court, the President's Council, however, conceded that it was illegal. In other words, we as taxpayers were burdened with funding court actions through a number of courts, when in the end the President's Council himself admitted that it was not legal. The same thing happened with their refusal to hand over tapes connected to the reinstatement of corruption charges against President Zuma. When it got to the Supreme Court of Appeal, the counsel for the President and the counsel for the NPA conceded that they had no legal basis for doing this. So you have a secondary abuse of public resources, which is happening on a number of fronts, with Motswaneng, the SABC, a number of situations where public funds are being used to fund cases which really have no chance of success, and they spin out. In the case of Zuma, they are spinning out a situation where he ought now already to be facing charges of corruption, because the North Gauteng High Court decided that the charges of corruption from 2009 had to be reinstated. They sought leave to appeal. The court said you have no chance of succeeding at a higher court. He's going to the Supreme Court of Appeal from the NPA, and is going to the Constitutional Court from the President. My guess is that there's no chance of this happening, and we are paying for this again. We have abuse of power in relation to state-owned entities. In the case of Eskom, SAA, as I was driving here, I was hearing that airways throughout the world are making massive profits on tourism. And South Africa has a number of places that are very popular tourist destinations. Now, if SAA were run on a regularized basis, and it ought not to be having this huge debt and be on the brink of bankruptcy. So you have irregularities with SAA, you have irregularities with Denel, you have irregularities with Eskom, you have irregularities in terms of who has access to decision makers in government, but also in the parastatals, with special deals being provided to certain families or individuals. So there is a broad sense that the rule of law is being undermined in South Africa, and we need to understand that under apartheid, the law systematically oppressed the majority of the people of South Africa by denying them rights in terms of that law. What you have now is a rights-bearing law. The law of South Africa today, the Constitution of South Africa today, ought to make a better life for all. It ought to defend people from their shacks being demolished in eThekwini, for example. But instead, that law is being overridden by abuse of power, not just at the top, but also at a local level in a number of different ways. You don't get clean audits. You also get defiance of court orders at the top, but also at a local government level. So my sense is that there is a crisis, and it's hard to see how we are going to get out of this crisis very quickly. It's a crisis of the ANC as the dominant party in South Africa, but the ANC crisis is not going to be resolved very easily, and it's not clear how the mess can be cleared up.
So how do we turn this around?
You see, I believe that, you must take what they say with some things. When you've got some problems, you take baby steps. Now, what I think is important in South Africa is not to try and look for ideological purity and agreement on ideological issues in the first place. If we can all agree on a limited number of issues which we can advance in order to go forward, that would be my way of addressing it. For example, restoring the rule of law and constitutionalism, ending corruption, clean government. I mean, the whole economic crisis in South Africa, the low growth economy, the high unemployment, all of these things are also threatened by a further downgrade in our investment status. And that downgrade is threatened because we don't have clean government. So we need to advance such goals, as well as strengthening values of the Constitution that encourage the reduction of the use of violence, and that relates to patriarchy, because the violence is mainly violent masculinities. So I would isolate a few of these issues. We would have to unpack patronage as a way of running access to office and running the occupation of offices, that people expect when you are elected that you will hand out this, hand out that. So I would take a limited range of things and also identify figures who are not controversial, who are not politically partisan, to help lead a process, building a dialogue on these and a range of other fronts, including, of course, the educational front.
Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about whether South Africa is in crisis and what needs to be done.